Thank you so much for tuning in to Huge Theater's YouTube. Tonight we present to you Reclaiming Our Value, Comedians in America with Disabilities. Please welcome Colton Dunn and John Gabritakios.
Hello. Hi, everybody. It's me, Colton Dunn, and here comes my buddy, John. Thanks so much for coming out today. We're going to have a discussion. We got a lot of awesome people from around the country. There he is. What's up, buddy?
Hey. Sorry, the delay. My internet might come in and out here for a second just because I paid half of the bill. So
yeah, man, you get half the speed.
That's right. That's right.
So, for those of you guys checking this out, John and I wanted to put together a panel. I think everybody from sort of just the improv sketch comedy community as a whole has really, taken some of this time during the pandemic to really look at ourselves and how we could be a better community and serve all the members of it. And we did a panel a little while ago with Black performers, just trying to elevate voices, share experiences, talk about things that theaters could do better. And we thought that the same kind of panel would be just as useful for our, community members with disabilities, and just as useful for the rest of the community to really have a conversation and hear a conversation with them to see what things in our, our sketch improv comedy community need work, and what things are good and what things we can all do better together, and just to really hear each other's stories.
That's right. That's it. That's exactly it. I just want to take 1 second. Let's talk about who we are, like what kind of work we're doing. So I'm at Huge. I'm the diversity inclusion director, and it's kind of like been an honor to be able to help get everybody in the community to think about what types of people we need to have included in other voices. And that's the other part to working with our theater. And you, my brother, are on a television show, and you play a character who is in a wheelchair, right? And
that's right. I play on a show called Superstore. I play a character named Garrett who uses a wheelchair. We're shooting our 6th season right now. So for me, obviously, is playing a character, who has a disability. That's something that I take into account with the character and trying to play it as responsibly and respectfully as possible. That's really what kind of connected me to what the world I came from which was like the improv and sketch community, which is what I kind of came up in, as far as a performer at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater. And so kind of the intersection of those two things, sort of my experience playing a character who has a disability, using a wheelchair, and, and the community that I come from, and how either just not even just people who use wheelchairs, but all people with different types of disabilities, what their experience is like in that community that, that I came up in. I think I'm really interested to hear more about and to hear how we can make things better for everyone.
Oh, that's great. I love it. So without further ado, we should jump right in. But before we do, I just want to be clear that we're going to apply the golden rule, obviously, which is, we're going to treat each other the way the way we would want to be treated. This is a respectful place. And if people don't know or terms or what have you, we would just, we're just going to just act right about it. Act right. I don't know how else to say it. Just be decent, and we're going to try to educate and inform each other with love moving forward.
And we got Santina, I think, in here, and being decent, that's not her thing.
That's not Santina's. Well, I'm going to learn today. No. And then the other part to it is that the closed captioning should be an option within the YouTube scenario. So if you are watching this, please look for that. Otherwise, I'll talk about this later. If anyone wants to talk about closed caption in that whole world, I'm in research mode and looking for any and all different possibilities. So that's just something I want to put at the top. And thank you, Colton, for this idea, and thank you for kind of just like really being the battery and moving this forward. I appreciate you. Okay, should we do it?
Yeah, man. Let's bring everybody in here.
Okay, well, let's go one at a time. Our first panelist is Liz Marcucci. Liz Marcucci.
Hey, Liz.
Hi,
Yeah.
how are you?
Hey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm an improviser in Chicago, and I also have a podcast where I interview artists and comedians with disabilities about the intersection of their art and their health.
Wow.
Wonderful. Thank you for
That's
being
great.
here.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for doing the panel today.
Yeah.
And having cool art behind you.
Oh, hey.
Right. Next person, let's put our hands together for Alayna McNamara. Alayna McNamara.
Hey everybody! I also have art behind me. My name's Alayna, and
Nice.
I am an improviser from Austin, Texas. I teach, perform, and direct there, and I'm also a special education teacher. So get it from both sides, y'all.
Oh, wonderful. Love to hear it. Next person coming on up is Chuy Zarate.
Hey, everybody. Hi.
Oh, hey, Chuy.
I live in Austin, Texas as well. I'm an improviser here. I've been improvising for 30 years this year. Teach improv. I also advocate through PTA for my children's schools. So there you go.
Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you. And next person coming on up is Tara DeFrancisco.
Hey! Hi, everybody. I'm Tara DeFrancisco, a former Chicago improviser and educator at IO Chicago, Second City, Comedy Sports, and now I run the Nest Theater in Seabus, Ohio, or Columbus. It's the worst name, so we call it Seabus here. But I'm the artistic director and co-founder of that space, as well as the Improv Retreat, and do some commercial stuff as well. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I brought dogs. So that's my art for today.
Thank you. Next coming on up is Ryan Strunk.
Hey everybody, good evening. I am I suppose you could say, amateur improviser. I've been doing it now for about 8 years, and I think that's probably because I'm afraid to take a leap. But the rest of the time, I serve as the president of the National Federation of the Blind of Minnesota, where we work on advocacy. And when both of those things aren't happening, I am an accessibility engineer.
Awesome.
Ooh, thank you. You're a professional. All right.
I don't have any art behind me, so we're just gonna have to chill at the table.
All right, me neither. I just have a window as well. We're on team window. That is okay. Let's give it up for Santina Muha. Said it wrong.
Hi everybody, I'm Santina Muha. I'm an actor, writer, improviser. I'm also on the diversity committee at the Upright Citizens Brigade. I used to host a show there called Rolling with My Homies, which I've now turned into a sort of a talk show that you can watch live on Sundays. I'm also a member of Project Rethink, and I'm on One Day at a Time, and I'm exhausted.
I bet. Yeah, great, wonderful. Thank you. So, should we just get right? Am I forgetting anybody here? And I just got word here that the YouTube closed caption is not working. I did forget somebody, didn't I? Damn it.
Yeah, we got Jessica.
Jessica, put your hands together for Jessica. Arjet. Oh, sorry, Jessica.
Yeah, I am a co-director. Sorry. I'm co-owner of the Hideout Theater in Austin, Texas. I run our youth program there. I do lots of directing and acting. And I've just written a book called Conducting Chaos, Teaching Improv to Kids and Teens. And if you want to support my Kickstarter, you have 2 more days for that. Or just wait until December and order it wherever you order books. So.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. And sorry for forgetting my memory. Whatever. Anyways, thank you all. Should we just jump right into it? We have these questions laid out, and we can go in some sort of order, but if you also feel inspired, just jump right in to speak. This is for us to kind of like collaborate and talk, which is what we don't do in the state of Minnesota. So great. Thank you so much. Because anyways, the first question is, what we just want to know what roadblocks you encountered when you entered improv or sketch comedy while having a disability, or what ways what things did you notice that kind of like got in the way because you have a disability?
Yeah, especially when you first enter into, I'm sure all of us had that moment where we first showed up at the theater that we really wanted to perform at, or, saw a show at that space. And I think it's, really important for the community and for other performers out there to really see what it's like when you come into that theater for the first time and how you view it, through your eyes, whether and how achievable it seems to become a part of that community.
I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
So my name is Liz. I was born with a birth defect and then eventually ended up throughout my life having 16 or so surgeries. And I found that through having chronic pain and not being able to walk sometimes, I spent a lot of time rejecting my body and not really listening to it, trying to turn off those signals of pain. So I remember when I got into class and our instructor very early on was asking us to do object work and to emote. And I was thinking I was doing things that I wasn't actually doing because I had shut off my relationship to my body. So I didn't really understand how to use it and how it fit within space in relation to other people and even to myself. And it was a huge learning experience for me, but also for my instructors to figure out how to teach me how, and they couldn't. So I ended up having to hire a private acting coach to figure out how to relate to my body. And we used mirrors and all sorts of stuff that they do in like occupational therapy to help me to connect my brain to my body now so that I could do simple things like how do you pour coffee when there's no coffee pot?
Wow. Thank you.
That's like a big petty one. They're also access, like there were lots of stairs.
Yeah.
I'll jump on that. Stairs. I use a wheelchair. And I can't, no matter how many flight attendants ask me, no, I can't get up even for just a few minutes. It was a physical challenge for me when I got here to Los Angeles. And I chose UCB as my improv theater based on accessibility. And at the time, it wasn't accessible, but it was the most accessible because it didn't have a huge flight of stairs, but I still was being lifted on and off the stage. I'm happy to say that that's no more. The stages, all of UCB's stages are wheelchair accessible now, which is really exciting to say. But, the classes at UCB were accessible and stuff. So that's how I chose the theater in the end that I ended up going with. The other challenge I faced was the sort of mental barriers of people not knowing how to deal with my comedy that was based on my disability, right? Sometimes I'd throw in a joke that was based on my wheelchair, especially if it was a jam or something where I was with people who didn't really know me or know my sense of humor yet. And they would panic and not know how to react and just completely throw yes and out the window and try to justify why this person isn't walking in some absurd way. Because she's in a wheelchair. What the hell's wrong with that? They would make me an astronaut or something crazy. And so, and so that was it. So the physical and the mental barriers of trying to make people just more comfortable with my situation. It's like oftentimes people are less comfortable with your situation than you are, which is absurd. So just trying to navigate that, and just while trying to be funny and a woman in comedy and move up the ladder and just all of that at the same time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody want to go next?
Well, I
would say,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Oh man, you're being so Minnesotan right now. So I was incredibly fortunate, I think, here in Minneapolis because the people that I started working with right at the very beginning were incredibly just flexible with everything. I think one of the things that was phenomenal for me about improv is that because we live often in a world of uncertainty or not necessarily knowing what comes next, there's a certain flexibility and a certain willingness to adjust and be creative and that sort of thing. And I encountered that immediately here with regard to blindness. In fact, I think the first time that it really hit home for me was I had walked into this class and the instructor, Brian, came up to me and he said, so we're going to do this exercise today where you have to mirror the person across from you without saying anything. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but I would love to figure it out with you. And I just thought that was this amazing way to be like, okay, this is what we do in improv as we figure these things out and we roll with it. So I personally have been lucky, but what I would say is being on the fringes of the larger community every now and then conversations will pop up in, say, discussion groups and the like, and somebody will say, I have a blind student and I don't know what to teach them, and somebody else will respond, well, they'd probably be really good at the bat. And the bat is a particular improv scene that only happens in the dark, and it's basically like an improvised radio play, which is great. But there's something that feels really kind of terrible and pandering about the fact that you have a blind student and your first idea is to go to the bat. So don't do that. I think getting past the misconceptions about blindness is probably the biggest thing that any blind improviser or actor is going to come up against.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. I don't know. Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Here. Well, I come at it from a little bit of a different perspective because I've only been disabled for about, I don't know, 7 years or so. Like with some, I didn't really recognize it before about the last like 4 years. So I'm an alcoholic, and because of my alcoholism, I now have cirrhosis of the liver, which basically affects pretty much my whole body, but really manifests itself most of all in neuropathy. Now, the thing about it is there weren't roadblocks for me at the beginning. It wasn't hard at all. I just would jump around the stage and do whatever I needed to do. I was able-bodied, you know, drunk half the time, not gonna lie, but definitely wasn't a problem. And then I started having these issues where I would swell up and stuff. And I mean, I remember like actually like having to have a friend help me like button my pants, because I just couldn't reach around myself to do so because I was so swollen with liquid because the liver wouldn't process anything. And this is when I was getting healthy, by the way. And stairs. Somebody said stairs, and I mean, I think it relates to all of us. My God, I've never had more trouble with a like 7-inch riser in my life than I did once I finally acknowledged my disease. Now I find I think I got in it at the right time with my disability, because things are thought about now. The fact that there are ramps, the fact that there are concessions for these sorts of things, it's been great to be a part of, yeah, just kind of a different perspective.
Thank you. And
I'm in a similar boat to you. And hi, friend. Hi, new friend. I think similarly. I started improvisation in 1999 at the very tail end of 1999 in Chicago, and was fortunate enough to work a lot there on the stages at IO Chicago and Second City, and comedy sports, especially, of which is an incredibly active, like high energy show. And I had severe illnesses starting in 2003 that were genetic in nature, that were often misdiagnosed and mistreated. And around 2012, I was correctly diagnosed. So that 9-year period was me just sort of trying to figure it out while I was fortunately advancing through these ranks. So by the time I had some agency as an instructor or main stage performer at those places, I started kind of being able to call out things. And as a queer performer too, I had sort of been like always keeping my eye on what felt inequitable in any of those spaces anyway. But you know, when it becomes you in a different sense about access, you start to notice like, oh, I can't get this walker on stage with me. I can't use my cane, or it takes a lot of effort to get on stage with a cane. Things like that. And it's really incredible how many spaces are ushered in through old laws, or they don't have access to stages, or luckily new builds are looking for that, right? Like they're all looking for ways to find us more space, more possibility to get on stage or to perform on stage. But there were years I was rolling around with like a roller scooter, you know, in hand, and trying to do a Herald. It didn't make any, or doing sketch comedy, and it was wild. You know, people would have a hard time like staying in the show watching me do that, and I found that really interesting. So designing a space of my own later, like designing I have a sleep-away camp for improvisers, and I have a space in Columbus, Ohio that's home to 500 performers, and we're really careful about kind of trying to think of something before we're questioned for it. I think that's sort of the wave of the future. I hope that we can start to think about more people that aren't ourselves, rather than only thinking about something when it's time to think of someone, so that they don't have to be forced into these like awkward conversations of what their needs are, because hopefully we're looking out for them as humans before that. the decision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my disability is my body is able, but I've got neurodiversity, which I used to call learning disabilities.
Mhm.
You might recognize that term more. And it's funny, I really don't talk about this much. And when I was asked to be on this, I was like, are you sure you want me? I was like, I don't know. But fortunately, Colton was like, yeah, that would be great. And a lot of it's because I kind of hide a lot of times. And so I was like, nothing stopped me when I first came into improv. And then I was like, oh yeah, Jessica, what about that hot burning shame anytime somebody made fun of the fact that you couldn't remember an actor's name? Me personally, I have a really hard time with anything that's an object. Nouns are particularly difficult for me, and sometimes they'll just leave me. And specifically proper nouns, there's just no reason that your name is the name it doesn't relate to anything in my head. So it's really hard for it to stick. And so people would talk about like back in the day when I first got in, this was many years ago, there was a lot of like reference to pop culture stuff. And I would constantly get people's names wrong or mix them up. And people wouldn't nowadays people laugh at that in a way that's fun and with you. But back in the day, they sort of laughed at you. They laughed at you a lot more. I remember how kind of humiliating that was. And I will say the only thing that kept me in improv is that was sort of my experience everywhere. So it wasn't a difference in improv, but I also I made the show. I used to be a professional clown. I was a professional clown for 17 years. And my joke was that people just always laugh at me. So I might as well get paid for it. Really true. And so improv was kind of the same way. It's like, well, if people are going to laugh, I'm going to make them, I'm going to make them laugh. It's much nicer now. People are just in general less likely to make you feel less than because of something you've said, which is really nice. Except on Facebook, people will still correct my spelling. Guys, just let it go. Who cares if it's THY apostrophe R? Yeah, they're all the same. Just say it, and you'll get the idea. It's fine.
Right. Hey, thank you for sharing that. I didn't realize, this is if this is kind of like one of your first times speaking about this publicly. Thank you. This it takes so much courage, and we all recognize that and appreciate you for that. And we only criticize the trolls who misspell. So yeah, is that, did anyone else want to? Yeah,
I'll talk.
go ahead. Yeah.
So I was diagnosed with MS when I was 17, and I started improv about 2.5 years ago. So I'd been in the chronic illness game for a while before I had my first improv class. And I have a master's in education. I'd done SPED kind of analyses. So I had pretty high expectations for the environment that I wanted to come into. The reason I actually chose my current theater was because they have a program for kiddos with disabilities. And so I thought okay, cool. They've got this great built out program where they're really providing supports and being forward thinking. And I remember it happened the very first class that I knew that I might have some trouble writing, and they had sent out an email about how there's going to be a survey that they want us to fill out right before. And I had responded to the email saying okay, I have trouble writing. Can you give it to me digitally? And I never got a response. So I'm high anxiety walking into this class that's already anxiety inducing, right? Because it's an improv class. And I know that my accessibility needs are not going to be met walking in the very first day. And so then I'm on high alert, and I realize throughout the whole first level that I really had to advocate for myself super strongly. We would play this game called the hat game, which, if you're not familiar, basically involves a physical hat being passed between players. And if you're a person who's autoimmune, seeing that can be really shocking, right? I did not know. I mean, I was like 21, 22. And so I was very hesitant to say, like, I can't do that. Like, there's no way that I'm going to accept all of those germs from these people that I don't know when it's, possible for my disease to like really progress and get really sick from that. And so one of the things that was really challenging for me was to have to do that self-advocating so hard and so often because the teachers weren't trained in how to create an accessible class.
Man, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and maybe if we could even share a little bit, if people want to expound on this at all. But from a couple of the stories that I heard, especially Ryan and Santina, of this idea of how people respond and interact, and what's the difference from almost like coddling or trying to take care of the person and being respectful. Because I think what you'll find is a lot of people think they're being respectful. They think that a certain way of acting is respectful when, perhaps it could be taken as like, well, I don't want to do a Herald in the Dark. That's not what I showed up here to do. Like it's almost feels disrespectful to make me do that. And so how do we, are there moments where you felt like, and I think we've already heard a couple of experiences in that, where you felt like somebody really interacted with you and respected, the disability, or respected taking the time to find out about it, as opposed to even experiences where you felt like their first interaction was overly, treating you, like you're delicate, or, something like that.
Yeah, and I wanted to add too with sketch, with improv, that I faced the challenges I talked about earlier. With sketch, it was like being in a wheelchair for, and being in a sketch, it's like the audience was waiting for the punchline, like, can't wait to see why this teacher's in a wheelchair, or like, can't wait to see why that girlfriend's in a wheelchair. Like, they just couldn't fathom that it wasn't a prop, right? Until people started to get to know me as who I was, and then they would be able to just know that, oh, it's not going to come up. But I think people are always waiting for it to come up. For me, I think, to answer that question, I think that's a lot to do with following the person's lead, because I think, not everybody is comfortable with the same level of joking or the same level of whatever. So if you are in let's say in a jam and you don't know the person, I wouldn't make a disability joke. But if they do, I would, no pun intended, I would roll with it, because that's them saying this is okay. But I then again, getting to know somebody, I'll never forget, I was on a team with a friend of mine we had been on a team for about a year at this point, and we were doing this scene, and it was about, we were up against each other in a play for this part. And she said, how's she supposed to play that part? It was in the Nutcracker. She goes, how's she supposed to play that part? She can't even dance. And she like kind of whispered it to the teacher. And I had known this girl for over a year, and I just wanted to hug her. I wanted to stop the scene and hug her, because it was the first time that because it was funny. It was like a funny, her character was a bitch, and it was something that this character would say. It was punching down or punching up. And it was what the character would say. And I just was like refreshed. I was refreshed that we were going to get to play with that. And like I said, this is someone I had known, and we're still friends, to this day. Her baby pooped on my arm a few weeks ago. So, I mean, we're friends. So, then it was okay. But so I think it's like that. It's like about following the person's lead. She knew by that point that this was fair game, and this was something that I was itching to see more of. I was itching to see more of my wheelchair being part of the comedy. And so it's about creating that level of respect with your scene partner, which is what improv is. That's part of what it is. It's part of why improvisers are such great listeners in general, people who've been doing it for a long time. It's something that you learn.
So I want to take it from a slightly different angle, only because in my experience, at least, and it was some unfortunate ones back in, say, high school, attempting to get into theater, one of the things that I realized very quickly was that I didn't have the acting bug, according to my teachers. And I think a big part of that was because I would come out and I would deliver my line and I would just sort of sit there up straight and I wouldn't gesture or anything. And that was all the further it went. And so I never learned about physical emoting or anything like that. But one of the things that did come out of it, particularly as I got into improv, is at least in my comfort level on the stage, I could set my cane down and pass in a certain respect, which is a double-edged sword, right? Because I have been, for example, chased around the stage and stepped off the back of it, which we turned into a great fall through a trapdoor, and it was amazing. But it is to say that I think what I would say, and I don't think that my way is wrong. I don't think that your way is wrong, but I think what it really goes to is Colton's question a moment ago is the first and the best thing you can do is ask. Because if you don't ask, then you run the risk of doing the wrong thing. And so to say, what are you comfortable with? What are you okay with? And get to a place where then you let the person decide as opposed to deciding for them how they'll best be accommodated.
Yeah, that's true. That is something I had to do whenever I was placed on a new team or something like that. I learned that I had to bring up if they weren't going to ask, I had to bring it up and talk about that. And it's true. If the person doesn't bring it up themselves, then I think that we have to be okay, especially right now in these times. I think people are becoming more comfortable with asking because people are seeing that we're not getting the right information from TV, from media. We think we know, but we really don't. And again, every person has a different response or opinion. So you can't just, you can't ask me and then go do a scene with somebody else in this group and think because you talked about it.
Yeah.
That point brings me to, in talking to people with disabilities through the podcast, everyone's at a different point in their journey of how long they've had their disability, how, I don't even like using the word accepting, but just like how comfortable they are talking about it. Some people are very newly disabled and they don't know how to advocate, or they don't have that like confidence yet. They haven't had enough positive experiences where they have advocated and people have met them with support. And so I think that that's interesting too, to take into account. And I know it makes it harder for our teammates if we're all at different points of that, but to just be cognizant of that fact, that we're all at different, we're all at different points in that journey and we might not all feel comfortable. So yeah.
That's a great point. I feel like that's the more we normalize boundary conversations. I know we have boundary conversations at the Nest before anyone steps on stage together at the Nest Theater. We all have boundary discussions like we did before this call. This call started, so that we'd all know how we could best serve and protect each other. I think so many of the improv tenets that we all learn that are the formidable truths of what this art form is, or what comedy's tenets are, we kind of let those go when our adrenaline spikes and we forget that we should take care of each other primarily and first. And that has to be what it's about. And if we talk more openly, then we have this ability to connect in an enriched way, so that the shows actually get funnier and happier and more successful, because everyone actually feels protected. They're not playing protected, they feel protected, they're really protected, so that you can pretend better together, because we're just adults doing ridiculous things, and that does seem like what it's about. And that being said too, I also think it's important to say, if your comedy institution is your employer, something cool that's happened, when I was first diagnosed with many illnesses early, I was like very, very pressured to disclose my illnesses in several comedy institutions, because no one knew that HIPAA was a thing, or that things were like, we shouldn't be doing that. And I think if that had been my castmates, I would have felt comfortable with that. And when it was artistic directors or employers, it felt very scary for me, because I thought, if I disclose my illness, or my genetic illness, or my disability, then I may lose my job. And so a lot of it was like playing this kind of I don't know, this horrible game of how much can I tell them and how much should I keep private, so that I can feel seen as a comedic performer. So it's so important to like give people the space and boundaries they need.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Chuy.
Yeah, thanks. I come up from a different perspective again, a little bit, in that I don't show symptoms really to people when I'm walking around. You wouldn't know that I have these issues, this chronic pain, the fact that I am an alcoholic. You wouldn't know that by looking at me. And people inherently, when they find out somebody has something by surprise, they want to baby you. And a lot of times, I know for me and maybe for some other people, you know, like you're going for drinks or whatever, and somebody asks you, is this okay? Is it all right if I have a drink around you? And it's like one of those things where I'm just like, well, yeah, it's fine because you are having the drink. I'm not having the drink, so I'm gonna be okay here. And as a matter of fact, I'm trying not to even think about my shit. So it just reminded me that I have an illness. Thank you. You know, like, and they don't mean to. Nobody means to. Everybody's trying to do what feels like they should. You know, what they should do in these situations. But sometimes we just want to be, and we don't want to have to worry about this damn thing that's hanging over our head every moment of our lives.
Yeah.
It's nice to escape a little bit and to just kind of feel like a human, you know?
Yeah.
I love this work that we're doing around talking about boundaries. I think it's so important, especially for people with disabilities, when we're thinking a little bit like intersectionally, because people with disabilities are disproportionately likely to be survivors of trauma. And I know, like, very frequently in my early improv classes, there were a lot of less than trauma informed moments, right? Where you're asked to play a game where you are supposed to touch people's faces, and to, like, you know, a lot of early on men talking about sex in improv classes. And we know people with disabilities are more likely to have more complex feelings around a lot of those topics because a lot of us are survivors of trauma. And so I just upvote all of this talk about boundaries and making space for people, because it is so, that's one of the things that was really hard for me, was feeling like I had a space to talk about it, because I had to, like, I felt like I had to wedge myself in and be like, no, I'm taking this space, instead of the space being offered around it.
Yeah, you know, I listened to some of these to the stuff too. What's striking me is that we're talking about, you know, the idea of, like, ask questions, you know, give space, but and a lot of what I'm hearing, even between what Ryan and Santina said, is there's another element to the asking the question, which is to then listen to the answer. And, you know, I think that's a really important thing. And sometimes you don't have to ask a question to listen, and to try to take in how the person is presenting themselves, or presenting how they want to offer their disability or their trauma in any way to the group, or how they don't want to offer it. And I think all too often we're very used to being like, well, I'll ask you what it is you want, and then you say what you want, and then I do what you want me to do. And sometimes it's a little more fluid than that, you know. And if people can take a second to really open when they're interacting with people, you might get some of those answers, you know, that you want, without having to just ask a direct question that may, you know, you may just look at Chuy and go, I don't need to talk to this guy about a drink. He's having a great time. You know?
Look at him. He must be drunk.
It's funny that I could relate to what Tara said, even though she was talking about an invisible disability and mine being visible, in that I too would sort of, if I got a cold, or if I had felt for some reason I wasn't able to attend improv practice, or, you know, when I was put on a team, especially when I was trying to keep my place in the theater, I was always afraid that my disability would be to blame. You know, they would think, oh gosh, here we go, she's gonna be sick all the time. And it's like, no, sometimes I just get colds, you know, or whatever. So I too would feel like I would have to overdo it or overcompensate, because I just didn't want my disability to be blamed for anything. And that reminds me too of editing. I don't know, but the UCB theater version of editing is you sweep across the stage. Oh God. I mean, every time I try to edit, people think I'm entering the scene, and usually you edit at the high point. So now I gotta top whatever this person just said. I have no plan. That was always something. So actually, the show that I did rolling with my homies over at UCB was I put comedians in wheelchairs for them to just feel, you know, what it was like. And editing was always something that everyone always said to me after, like, oh my God, how do you edit? And I'm like, I know, it's crazy. So maybe we could change that.
Yeah, I was told I edit too slow because I can't move fast enough. So it really just drags down the energy of the scene.
Wow.
Sounds like a great coach.
I just don't edit anymore. Sorry.
You know, I should say then, just because this feels like an appropriate moment, at Brave New Workshop, when I started out, they would clap along with their sweep because it was hard for me to tell if somebody was, say, sweeping a scene or if they were, say, running from one side of the stage to the other. I couldn't see to know what they were doing. And so if somebody was sweeping the scene, as they stepped out to do it, they would give a big old clap, and then they would sweep the scene, you know, as part of that motion. And so that just became a thing. Whenever I did scenes with anybody who swept when I was on stage would do that. So it was this extra sort of audible cue that was like, okay, get off the stage.
Yeah.
That's so great.
Yeah.
I feel like that's something that we're all learning. And maybe in the past 4 or 5 years, it seems like more improvisational and sketch comedy theaters have gotten better about being less precious and nuanced about the mechanics of the show, because it's also like leaving out the audience in a lot of cases, right? Like if we're like, and this is the swirly edit where we're going into a new scene, most audiences are kind of like, what happened to that guy? I don't know what happened. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Why are we being efficient and direct? It's interesting that those mechanics are maybe helpful across the board anyway.
Yeah.
So like, why not get louder and like prouder about the way the show moves so that everyone can be included in that movement, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, nobody cares about the format as much as they care about the story and the people in them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, I've never met any family member that's come to a show was like, oh yeah, the way they, what was it? They tapped him on the shoulder. Oh yeah, tagging. Yeah, they tapped him on the shoulder, and that person walked out.
I thought it was a character tapping.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. We're learning.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I mean, it's you know, and I think we had the same kind of discussion sort of in our Black panels that, you know, a lot of these art forms, you know, especially you know, American improv and sketch comedy, they were started by 4 or 5 white guys, right? And so what these 4 or 5 white guys did and what worked for them, you know, slowly becomes these standards that become, well, this is how they do it. This is just how it's done. Well, that's how it worked for the 4 or 5 guys who started doing it. But now all these other people are coming into the art form. And so it's, you know, it's, you know, I think just as an improviser, you know, I get just sort of excitement of hearing like, oh, you know, a clap edit, or, you know, these different types of edits that even if you just shift that, you know, it goes back to sort of my first question of when somebody would walk into the theater and watch the show, if they saw, you know, an edit that was something that they felt like they could do, that they could be a part of, or if they see an edit or something that they're like, I can't do that, so I guess I better find somewhere else. You know, it's so interesting to kind of highlight, put a little flag on those things, because those are the things that I think our community as a whole can always take into account.
Yeah, I think every player should just wear a train whistle around their neck, and when they edit, go, and then, you know, time to get on to another scene.
Could work.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we can get rid of edits altogether, or
just only mono scenes.
Only mono scenes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would call a kid's Tarantino Harold.
Yeah. Yeah. Or we could work together so much and have so much empathy that we just know when the scene's done and we start the next one.
Everyone just leaves.
Yeah.
I mean, it's big in Europe. Yeah, I don't know. Any takes or things that this is making you all think through, or areas that we kind of want to add to it? There's no rush to it.
Well, you know, I think one thing that I, you know, that I also thought was interesting when we were sharing, and it may be, you know, but I'd like to hear more about is, you know, when we were talking about the game where the hat is being passed, you know, and how somebody who's immunocompromised would, you know, how that has such an incredibly different effect on that person than somebody who's like, yeah, man, I'm, you know, here to make giggles. And, you know, just like not even paying attention and probably sweating profusely, ready to, you know, contribute the germs to the hat. You know, but there's a lot of that in our world. There's almost culturally, especially in improv, you know, there's so much of the kind of you getting close quick in that group, and also giving, wanting to have everybody have this feeling of freedom to sort of say whatever they want. So it's, touching, or I think even the example was given is of men, bringing up sex, very soon. Like, how do you think as a community keep growing kind of the open and the, just sort of the, like, just let the walls come down aspect of bringing somebody into the art, but still maintain a space where when somebody else lets the walls down, it doesn't fall all over the other people who are also in that room trying to open up. If that question makes sense, I hope. But just how do we feel like we can support that same energy that I know for me as an improviser when I first got involved was like, I could do anything I want. I could say anything I want. And it was a complete like change, where I could be somebody else. But there was also times where I probably went way over the line on that, and so figuring out a way to, and maybe it's at the beginning, bringing up the boundaries at the beginning of a class, stuff like that. But are there any other ideas for how people think that can happen, or times where they saw it working a different way?
I know that at our place we have on the first day of class as a student performer or guest artist, we have everyone sign a code of ethics, and the code of ethics certainly protects people and maybe calls to attention that people share this space and it's not just cisgendered white straight men. I think that that's part of it. And maybe just kind of putting that out there in the ether also makes people think like, oh, who else is here? I don't think that generally speaking, people are walking into improvisational spaces probably looking for to cause pain, right? But it's just like this nervousness that is accompanying comedy work that is like, I have to be funny right now, also makes people make incredibly bad decisions sometimes. So that adrenaline does not serve us. So if we can just kind of gently approach people and say, hey, we have a code of ethics at the Nest Theater, huge theater. We have a student bill of rights that says like, you are allowed to stop a scene and say why this is uncomfortable for you. And the more we normalize that speech with one another, in any case, all these cases that we are talking about in 2020, like if we can normalize that behavior, the less problematic that stopping a scene happens. I mean, I know that as a female identifying person, a queer person, as a person with a disability, it's scary to be like, this doesn't feel good the first time. And then once everyone applauds you and says, cool, let's move on, then you're like, oh, okay. It's like ripping a Band-Aid off, right? It's like the first time you do it, you're like, I don't want to. And then it's like, okay, I get it. This is going to be fine. Especially your educators. I think people have to be really responsible in the education departments to make sure that they know we're taking care of each other primarily. Again, that idea of, can we love each other enough and love the work equally enough to protect one another and the work at the same time? And if that's the case, that'll allow freedom for more than less, I think, along the way.
I think there's also a component.
Go ahead, Elena.
Sorry. I think there's also a huge component of this that it can, like, having the ability to stop a scene is great. Like having a lot of the theaters in Austin have specific words like ouch, or I think one theater says bananas, where you could just stop and talk about the scene. And I think that's great. And we also need to recognize that can be a lot for people to do. And it's important for people to realize that they are still bringing things to it, right? Like if I need to be farther away from someone in a scene, then teach me about dramatic distance, right? Like teach me how to use that tool of space that I am, like, so that I have a benefit that I'm adding, because it can be really hard if you feel like you are having like the one person in the class that keeps calling stop. It can feel like you're like pushing out because of that. So I think we do need to take care of people on the opposite side of it too, and say like, look at this thing that you're bringing into it, like that you specifically brought into it because of the way that your body, your mind is.
So interesting. The idea of saying stop or banana or whatever in the middle of a scene is foreign to me. I don't know this. In my teaching, one of the main rules is you keep going no matter what. And then after the scene, we can talk about it. But I feel like, yeah, in practice or in class, at the very least, why not just stop and correct it in the moment? That's something that I'm gonna definitely bring to, you know, any sort of whatever coachings or anything that I do, because to me it's always been no way, because when you're on stage you wouldn't do that, and you got to power through and figure it out and do the math in your head as you go. So this is actually really good to hear.
Yeah, I think you know, it definitely is that, you know, when you start hearing and talking to a lot of people who go through classes at different improv theaters across the country, a lot of times that's where they give up on their dream. That's where they walk away because they don't feel empowered to speak up or to say something. And, you know, and quite honestly, the teachers just are not trained for that. Yeah. You know, a lot of times the teachers are people who are just, they're improvisers and they're trying to make some money to do improv, to teach improv. And we don't take that extra step, which one I think is just an overall training, but kind of even, you know, hearing here, like, even before a class starts, like a teacher having a dialogue with each student about where they're at and, you know, what kind of support they need. Do they understand, you know, the Bill of Rights, or that they can say something? Does that make them uncomfortable? Should I be ready to advocate to say something if, you know, if it's something that you're not there for? So that's, you know, I think that's, you know, yes, Santina, you're right. You know, at UCB, if someone was to stop the scene and say, hey, I don't like this feels uncomfortable, that would be very taboo. You know, people would be like, hey man, you know, what, you didn't know what was going to happen in the scene. You know, who knows what somebody would say to defend whatever reason they keep wanting to do the scenes. But in that situation, I would say the teacher should, and I have when I was teaching, stop scenes when they go off the rails, or when something is out of order. And so it's definitely good to give that.
But how would you know? You know, sometimes
exactly.
You know, it's this is why.
So you want to empower the performer to be able to do that as well is very important.
Yeah.
Jessica.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I love all of this. Everything that everybody's saying is absolutely 100%. I do with my students have a conversation during the first class. I usually have the first half of the class so everybody gets a little bit comfortable with each other, and then I sit down and talk about being kind. But something that I realized, because I do a lot of teaching of children and children with different abilities and needs, and I was like, you know what? Just telling people they can stop a class, and I saw this especially with the Me Too movement and starting to work with women on making sure that they felt safe. Just telling somebody they can stop a class does not mean that they're able to do that. And so I've started trying to figure out games that are consent games. And one of the ones that I think works really well is this game called People to People. And the way it was originally played is pretty terrible. But I'm kind of retooling it. So the idea is like everybody's in partners looking at somebody, and you say finger to shoulder, and then I would put my finger on your shoulder, and then whatever to whatever, nose to elbow, like they get silly, right? Back of the foot to knee, stuff like that. That's really hard to do. And then when you can't do it anymore, you say people to people, and everybody switches partners, and you do it again. So I started bringing this up of what if this is a consent game? And so I'm like, I just talked with the class about we need to be on the edge, pushing ourselves, trying new things, and being uncomfortable. We need to not be uncomfortable in a way that's icky. We need to be uncomfortable in a way that's challenging. So we're going to play this game so that you feel uncomfortable in a way that's fun and exciting to you. But the second it gets either physically or emotionally uncomfortable for you in any other way, like you've been asked to touch something you don't want to touch, you say people to people. And I tell you, we do that game. I go through that about like 6 to 10 times, like we switch partners 6 to 10 times, and people are much more able to stop things after that because they've been like the first time nobody wants to call people to people. And I'm like, dudes, you're going to have to call it sooner or later. This is ridiculous. Because you don't like take, like, it's not finger to shoulder and then you take it off, you keep it there. So you keep all these like weird things, and it gets weirder and weirder. And I'm like, yeah, it worked, and everybody claps and they're happy. So I think that that's something I'm still working on and would love to do more of, is not just say, it's really great to say, we feel these things, we're kind to each other, all of that, but how can we gamify it? Because I think in improv, you know, that's a lot of what we kind of do is gamifying these things. And so how can we gamify consent? How can we gamify, you know, making sure that the other person is comfortable, that kind of stuff. So that's one of the things that I've been working on. And it seems like, especially because you don't know what abilities or difficulties somebody might have, it forces you to start, I would love something that would force you to learn to listen a little bit more. I think we do a lot of that anyways, because so a friend of mine once, his dog had recently died, and during the first talk, you know, like, what are everybody's boundaries? He's like, I just don't want to play any scene with a dog. And it's like, that's not a thing that you would know beforehand, or that you would, you know, so I think it's really good to be able to do those things.
Yeah, real quick, I thank you. Yes, we just want to let everybody know that people who are paying attention or watching at home, just a quick reminder or plug, if you want to give $1 or $2 or whatever you want to, you can go to givehuge.com and just donate there. It is a nonprofit theater. And then the other part that I wanted to just add to is
and I just want to say, Huge is a great theater. Everybody's watching out there. You know, I started doing improv in Minneapolis years ago before Huge Theater, and there was not a ton of options. Oh, look, I'm getting all crazy on my video screen.
That's the rival.
My son all breaky.
The rival theater.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh no. But it's a great theater. They're doing great things. You know, not just John, but I know tons of the people who have started it, and it's thumbs up. So donate money. Thumbs up.
Yeah, thank you. Let's continue this conversation. I think we're talking about agency. I don't know if I'm wrong here, but we're talking about agency and protecting each other. But and then Alayna I said it wrong.
Alayna,
you brought up a wonderful point, and I think it kind of this idea of how do we advocate for each other? How do we be here for one another? There's this weird pressure for people to complete the show, have it go all the way through. Who cares if you've been harmed, or if you're harming people in the audience, or if you've seen partner said something weird, don't stop the show. And I mean, if you play that out in our heads, well, what happens if you take a second to pause the show or redirect it? Oh, well, then the audience, then they might be engaged in a very like curious way. Maybe they'll be able to learn something, you know? And then we kind of have this fear that we'll get kicked out of the biz. Some people won't be able to earn money or whatever. But I don't think that's. I have not seen that ever play out in a certain way where I was like, oh, a performer advocated for themselves and educated people, and now they're no longer allowed in town. But it is a real thought. So yeah, go ahead, Chuy.
I'm sorry. I wanted to bring up, because what Elena's saying is right, and I know I've heard of several different directors of shows like Maestro and that they have a really nice gentle way of doing it where it actually protects both of the actors on stage, the one with disability and the one that doesn't have the disability, so that they're not feeling any shame about it. You just kind of say to them, if you're not feeling consent, you just say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. You know, like I didn't understand that. And it's a thing between the two of you that you know that you need to redirect. It's almost like saying your choice to them without really embarrassing them or stopping the scene.
Right.
You know, some purists don't want to do, but
so exactly. There's tools we have in place, and then I want to add to it. A bigger thing is what's with this idea about us having to play the game the way these forefathers, who were these 4 or 5 white men that Colton talked about, that came on over to this new land, right, and discovered improv and set up these territories, right, and gave us these systems, and now vote, and we're like, do we need to use those old systems? Maybe we don't, you know. And I think that's kind of what I'm kind of getting, is how do we reframe and look at this whole industry to be more about for people and for one another, you know.
Throw away those systems. Just throw them away.
I think I'm probably the old grandfather. Yeah, you can. It's changed a lot. Go for it. Change it up. Yeah. I love the change.
I remember one of the things that most empowered me when I was starting out was the Hideout has an experimental show called The Free Fringe, and I was maybe halfway through classes, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna build an accessible show. That's the only thing I want. And for me, being a person with chronic illness, I look at accessibility and I think like, okay, people need to be able to cancel. Like people need to be able to say like, my chronic pain's too high, or I can't walk today and I'm not going. And so it needs to be something where, like, if 10 people call out, we can still do a show. And it needs to be something that, like, anyone can call out and it's fine. And building that culture of, like, it's one night, anyone can play who has a disability, was really powerful for me to have that experience of, like, I made a Google Doc and, like, asked people's accessibility needs and, like, sent out a letter. I was like in it. I did a lot of work for this to create an accessible show because there isn't a lot of it in Austin, at least. I know I felt like, well, I guess I can't do improv because I have to commit to, like, a 3-month-long show. Yeah. And, you know, who knows what's going to happen to me. Like, if I have an MS relapse and I'm not going to, like, be able to do much for a month, right? And so I think dreaming up, I'm reading this book called Care Work that talks about dreaming disability justice. And so dreaming up different worlds and systems of how we can do improv. Like, now we are doing virtual improv. Can we have a live show where someone improvises from bed, right? Like, and is projected on the screen behind them, you know, like thinking about these different worlds and formats, I think is really powerful that you're talking
Open
about.
that up, that dream world. Like, what else? Let's keep going with that. When we think about that, who has that other dreams? Yeah, go ahead.
I've talked to a friend and I learned after sitting next to him and his sister that his sister would relate to him all of the action that was happening on the scene because he's blind. And so we were talking about, well, how do we create a show where the action is happening, but part of the show is also improvisers describing what's happening on stage and using, like, lighting and sound cues and other things to sort of make that feel part of the art and not part of a functionality of accessibility, but how do we make that artful as well?
Yeah. That's
and
great.
I think some ways, you know, improv is in some ways built for that now, at least in terms of blindness, right? Because, like, when you do we cut to the inside of a factory and there is a giant pile of smoking tires over here. And of course, you're neither in a factory nor is there a pile of smoking tires. So I'm right there with you. Now, when you get into a 2-minute silent scene, we might have a problem that we ought to discuss as part of this dream scenario. But I do think that as we try to be intentional about, you know, just how do we explore more of the art form than just the visual, and to encompass all of the other senses, then some of those things can happen.
Yeah, that's the best. I mean, like, it's kind of that mechanics thing we're talking about again, right? Like, what can we do to allow not only our ensembles in, but more of our people that are preciously watching us? And I don't know about everyone here, but I primarily do long form and musical improv, but I have a background in short form. And I got this great window on this debate that really pertains to this panel. And it was this great discussion about the short form game called 185. Okay, so 185 is a classic game for anyone that doesn't know it. It's like 185 blanks walk into a bar. Bartender says, "We don't serve blanks here," and the blanks punchline. Okay, that's all it is. It's just a short form game. And this conversation went on for months, and it was so interesting about, like, why do we say we can't serve blanks here? Is this discriminatory? Can we say we're closed? So then it became we're closed, and then we're like, oh, that's good. That's good. If we say we're closed, then nobody gets service. And then it took us like a solid 6 months to realize that we could just be like, what would you like? And what would you like was fine. It was truly a half-year conversation for one short form improv game. And I think that it's like what John is saying, like, how can we reimagine what we have? We have this great framework. Thank you, whoever did it. Millions of people, millions of white people and old men, but also women that have been left out of the the paradigm. So many people have done this cool stuff. What's left? There's way more. There's way more. And there's also, like, ways to unthink what we've already had, right? To be like, how do we reframe this game? How do we reframe this form? How do we reframe this stage? How do we make sketch more interesting to hear? Whatever. Like, it's so exciting. It doesn't have to be overwhelming and painful. It's exciting. We're entering a new world. We're shifting into a new kind of theater.
If you'd have told me 10 years ago that I was going to be speaking into a computer and doing improv, I would have thought you're out of your fucking mind.
Yeah, totally.
It didn't change, and often for the better, for sure.
Yeah.
People ask me often, is your character, when you're doing improv, is your character in a wheelchair? And I'm like, I don't know. It depends. If I'm being it depends if it's relevant to the scene or not. And I find that I haven't done much improv over Zoom, but the few times I've done it, I've found that sometimes I enter a scene just by talking, but other times if in my head this character is in a wheelchair, I entered the scene like this with my arms above the vision of the the Zoom box so people can see I'm rolling into the scene, which is so funny to me. It makes me laugh because there's no way to really highlight on stage whether or not my character is in a wheelchair or not, because again, it's like people can just believe, it's like, well, your character, how could your character be on a treadmill? And I'm like, well, how could your character be on the moon?
Yeah, right.
You brought up one other thing just a moment ago that I wanted to highlight too, and I think when all the way back when Colton had said, like, what is one thing people can do, and I would say particularly when it comes to disability, I think in our society at large, the majority of people, the two groups they think they can still punch down at are people of size and people who have disabilities. And so I'm glad that we are getting to a place where we're breaking those paradigms. And I think one of the things that other people can do is, some comedy is targeted. And I understand that and I recognize that. But I think my boundary as someone who is blind is, don't make fun of me for the things I can't control. If you, and there are lots of examples of this, that, there was a blind character in Becker who showed up to the diner in lime green pants, and wasn't it funny that he didn't know he was wearing lime green pants? Or Saturday Night Live did a sketch about the blind governor of New York, and they made him pick up the charts the wrong way and wander into camera shots and all these stereotypical things that a blind person did. And look, there is enough about blindness that is funny already. We did a scene once just purely by accident where I hired somebody to read for me, but everything I wanted them to read for me were like dirty magazines. And it was hilarious, but it was like, I'm gonna need people to read things for me. Like, right. That's something that I have control over, as opposed to your presumptions of my disability being the thing that you think you get to make jokes about.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of that low-hanging fruit has been done, and it's just not even funny. And it's like lazy comedy anyway, So why not? Like you said, there's so much. Oh my gosh, there's so much. I thought that I was going to run out of wheelchair comedy when I started, and here I am, how many years later, and it just besides, anyway, the thing is, if I ever run out of anything, I could just go to the mall and come back with a whole new chapter of a book. People can't stop saying stupid things to me. So I think it's true. It's like, let us guide you, let us show you what's funny, because there is so much that's funny, and it's not the fact that whatever the really low-hanging fruit that we've seen also 100 million times, it's not funny.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things we all keep kind of saying is shut up and listen, which as actors, especially improv actors, we should be willing to do, I think, right? We got to listen. So yeah, just everybody be quiet and listen.
Yeah.
I love on teams that I'm comfortable with, and having conversations of consent and boundaries ahead of time, but letting people know that it's really important for me to play characters that have sexuality, because it's so common for us to desexualize people with disabilities.
Yes.
And so getting to do that, and just like any one scene where I get to do that, to me feels like, if there's only 3 people in the audience, or if there's 100, they all now have that in their brain of something that they've seen, and hopefully they'll take home and realize that, oh, that's a thing. It's a real piece of our lives that we leave off stage sometimes, and I don't want us to do that anymore. That's my little soapbox.
Oh, that's so strong.
It's because there's so little representation in television and media, and normalization of people with disabilities, that probably all of us in this room at some time have felt the onus of representing and trying to change people's perceptions, which is a lot of pressure to put on yourself when you're just trying to pretend as an adult and have a good time. But it's true, it's part of it. I completely relate to what you said about like sexualization and stuff, and wanting to, just my hope is that someday some piece of my work helps a girl get asked to the prom and it not be on the news, you know? It's like, that's a lot of pressure to put on ourselves, but it's part of it. And I think we're all kind of maybe I'm used to it, I guess. It's part of who I am at this point.
So given the, thank you. I want to move on to the third question, which is what can we do now? And then for those of you at home, you can write in some questions in the chat, and then Shoshana, who's co-producing this, will jump on here in a little bit and we can take some audience questions. What can we do now? What would you all like to be done now? And these, don't hold back. There's no budget. There's no ceiling. Like, what can we do now? Like, real talk.
Get people with disabilities in leadership.
Yeah.
Like disabled directors, disabled people who are on your house teams, disabled theater owners, disabled teachers. Like, I feel like I know so much about disability because I've been motivated personally to learn about it. And like, let me teach a class over an able-bodied person any day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tara.
I would love to see us figure out how to include people with disabilities in more acting roles as well. And the thing is, I don't know what that looks like in terms of, because I'm somebody who paid somebody to help me learn physical motions. Because I'm not, say, actor wise facially emotive, and so I had to be taught how that happens, because at least for the moment, if you want to get into acting, you have to do it in many instances in a way that passes as somebody who is not somebody with a disability. And so you are expected then to have the skills and the talents and the chops and everything else to be able to fulfill one of those roles. And so I guess what I would love to see is either more opportunities given where people are okay sort of teaching. One of the ones that comes to mind for me is I was in a scene one time with a person, and I was a god, and he was the one last person who believed in me. And so I was basically at his whims, and he gave me this big, beautiful, flowy dress, and I was running my hands down the dress, and the coach said, "Okay, stop. Ryan, you're not looking at the dress as you're running your hands through it." And it was like, that's a really good note for me. And so I think we either have to figure out, how do we give more of those opportunities to people?
Right.
I was privileged enough to be able to pay for that. Or how do we get to a point as a society where we go, okay, there's a person in this scene who is not looking directly at the camera, and that's okay.
Yeah. Ryan, we live in Minneapolis or Minnesota. I said this earlier. How do you expect those white folks to talk about those sort of scary things in this state? No, I'm kidding.
Well, what they do is they say it to like their mother-in-law, and then their mother-in-law says it to their brother, and then I hear about it fourth hand, and then I know.
That's very real. Yeah.
Me personally, I would just love it if people cut me some fucking slack sometimes. At the beginning of every semester, I send out all these emails about times and classes, and there's so many numbers in them, and there's so many like little details that I always get one thing wrong. And most of the people are pretty nice about it, but every once in a while you just get somebody who's like, maybe you should review your emails before you send them out. And I'm like, how many motherfucking times have I reviewed this email? It's just stuff like that. Like, I am gonna have a really hard time with details, like number, word, like anything really specific. I'm great with big patterns, so I'm good with that, but those little tiny details are hard. And it would just be great if people were like, you say like, just want to make sure, did you mean October? And that'll be fine, but just a little slack would be awesome in my world.
Yeah. And also taking into account when you're casting a team or something, when you're measuring people up against each other for whatever reason, taking these challenges into account. Maybe so-and-so is quicker than this person with the disability, but maybe you need this person with the disability on that team, even if they aren't as quick as the other 7 people that you have, whether it's physically quick or mentally quick or emotionally, whatever it is, just taking that into account to have richer teens, because there's going to be someone in the audience that maybe is equivalent to that person and maybe, you know, and they're going to relate to that person's humor. So you can't measure everybody up against each other equally. I know that was a problem for me. I felt like I was constantly being measured up against my able-bodied teammates, and it just didn't feel fair. And I didn't want to say that because I didn't want to sound like I was, you know, using my disability as a reason to stay on the team. I mean, it was like just the mental gymnastics I was doing in my head on top of trying to make sense of what some of these white guys were doing. I mean, and to make that funny, it was just too much for my, you know, my brain. And also another big thing for me too is just the physical accessibility of it all, making sure that, you know, as people, I'll speak for myself, or people with, you know, physical disabilities like mine, making sure we can get into the building, and then that we can get onto the stage, and then that we can get into the bathroom, because, you know, performance pee jitters are real, y'all. And I would like to not have to go to the restaurant next door every time before I do a show. It's, you know, it's annoying.
Right. Like codes of ethics are important, and boundary talks are important, and normalizing discussion is important. And something cool that our able-bodied or neurotypical friends can do for people is maybe your challenge in 2021, when we all we all maybe get to play in a theater again. I don't know.
What?
Maybe I know, right? But if you can be the person that asks of your theater that you think that there needs to be changes made for other people before they have to ask for it, you're going to do a great service for people like us. I mean, like that's the most important thing when we're taking care of our BIPOC friends, or our women plus, or LGBTIQ, or people with different ability, or veterans over 65, whatever is not your pocket. You are doing a great service for art. So just like, can you ask something of your theater that you notice that isn't necessarily a problem for you, but just something that you're like, this could help a million people. And then if I could go one step further, offer the theater a solution that you're willing to engage in to help. Because I think theaters are also like strapped for cash in most cases. This is a really tough time. So if you can say like, hey, we don't have a ramp. We don't have a ramp on this that goes to the stage. Very easy thing to solve. Maybe you can help by like suggesting ways that theater can fix that. And it takes a lot of like power. And it's really exciting to think that if more eyes make more solutions, because we're collaborative and always looking out for each other, it makes a stronger net for everybody. If we're just looking for things that don't only serve ourselves.
Kind of along that same lines, but more specific, when we're talking about the disability of addiction, which does exist in this genre of art for sure, we're so quick to just automatically one strike they're out. You know, a lot of time, and even then, the stigma of whatever fuck up that person had chases them for a long time. They have a lot to prove to people. It'd be nice if there was a little more compassion. And that, I think that goes without saying for everything, but specifically, I mean, because that's what my world is for people who have problems with substances. And we have to realize that's a disability that really, really can hurt a lot of you physically, mentally. It hurts people around you. If you're dangerous, obviously you need to be taken out of the situation. But there are people who get away with it, and you know that they are. You know that they're addicted to something. You know something's going on. Don't exclude them. Bring them in. We talk about being this family and this community as improvisers, this worldwide community, and it's so accepting and loving and all this. I think that goes to a point, and we really need to start thinking about how we can expand that compassion to everybody who has these issues.
Yes.
I relate to that with mental health consumers. I think that we need to look out for each other on that level too, and that being a performer can be really stressful. It's stressful on all of us, and taking into account that when we have physical disabilities, sometimes those overlap with our mental health conditions. Maybe they don't, maybe it is just a mental health condition, but a lot of that goes into what Alayna was talking about with, you might have to miss a show. You know, if someone has depression, they might have to miss a show, and then not punishing them and not giving them another opportunity because of that. Instead, trying to be more welcoming and understanding and saying like, I see where you are at, I value you and I want to meet you where you're at, instead of asking you to jump to the guidelines that I've set, which why we don't need those. They're old.
Right.
I think I was one of the people who had to call off of a show that Elena had put together, and she was nothing but accepting of it. She was very kind.
I mean, that's all. It's short, simple, like, okay, take care of yourself. That's all you need, you know?
I run a show, and when people have called off, I just I'll say, well, you're on the next one. And all the performers know that, and they know that then the next week someone might get less time, but they all know that it's for the greater good, that if they need it, they'll get the same accommodation down the road.
You know, one thing I'm thinking about when Santina's talking about accessibility, and that I've thought about, and I'm sure a lot of you guys doing shows in like old black box theaters and stuff have heard this, but of theaters getting grandfathered into something, so they don't have certain accessibility because they're grandfathered in. I think we need to figure out a way, and this is, you know, I mean, we're just some improvisers, but just to put that thought out there, that we need to change that type of legislation. That shouldn't be grandfathered in. If anything, the state or the government should give you money to whatever it costs to make that particular change in your theater space, so that it isn't up to the person who needs the ramp to raise the money for the ramp.
Right.
You know,
this stuff is bullshit. It's bullshit, and it's all loopholes, and it's dumb. It's bullshit. And I wish that there were more people at the top who were willing to be honest about that. It's not true. I mean, I don't know the specifics of it, but it's something like, you know, if you change a faucet in your bathroom, then it's no longer grandfathered in. It's no longer historical. Your building is not a museum, right? The second you update it at all, it's no longer grandfathered in. That's like sort of my understanding. Again, I don't want to misspeak, but this grandfathered in thing is just
we can tear down statues now that were historical that we don't need anymore. We can take down some of those historical protections of buildings flat out.
I want everyone who is afraid to build relationships with people with disabilities to not only examine why they are afraid, but I really want them to have that be a goal for them to just get rid of it. Like, make those friendships, make those connections, and really get to know the people, your students, your classmates, whoever's in your community outside of this, even like really know the people, really get to know thy neighbor. That's the work. I have a mom, and she has schizophrenia, has had it my whole life. So I've been right there by her side the whole time. And I've just noticed that everyone loves her when they see her. It's very sweet and everything. But when that interaction's done, where are they at? Where y'all at?
Right.
What's up? Well, we're just friendly when she's around, but then we don't know how to really pick up the phone because we're afraid to have a conversation with someone who has schizophrenia, and that can be. And I understand that can be intimidating, but I just want people to look into it. I'm not saying they need to be something they're not. Just check into that and what that's about. Let's start there.
Circling back a little bit to the idea of like buildings that are grandfathered in, I would love to hear, Jessica, your perspective as like an owner of a building, right? I know you've done some work to make the hideouts downstairs accessible, but the upstairs is pretty inaccessible in terms of stairs.
Yeah, we bought a theater from somebody else who already had it. So we came into a theater, and the first thing that we looked at was it's one's on the floor, ground floor, and the other one's up a flight of stairs. And so we looked into, could we add that thing that brings the wheelchair upstairs? And that was like $60,000. Could we build an elevator? That was like $100 and something thousand. So there were things, but like even during this conversation, I'm like, we could do more. It's funny because it's one of those things where like when I'm not looking at people, it's easy for me to be like, oh, well, we did everything that we could, right? But now I'm looking at people and I'm like, you know what, we could do more. I really don't like the idea that Santana can't be on my stage.
Yeah,
that really pisses me off.
But it would be nice to hear that honesty of, what, we looked into these options are too expensive and we're still looking. I'd rather hear that than the bullshit excuse of we're grandfathered, you know,
Yeah.
like the honesty and the transparency, I think is really important, because it's true. It's unfortunate that we're in this situation with the medical industry that something like that is that expensive. What the hell?
Does seem
Crazy.
we did move our stage back 18 inches to make it more accessible for people to sit. But now I'm like, what? I'm like sitting here, I'm like, why don't we have a ramp? Like we do accommodations, but I'm like, we should have more stuff. Anyways, that is my perspective as somebody who owns a theater, is like, it's really motherfucking expensive.
So expensive. It's so expensive.
But also, I'm pretty sure if I keep like you in my mind, I can do better.
I'll send you a headshot. You can put it
I think it's also like, isn't that why we do stuff like that? Because I mean, probably some people didn't understand anything about neurodiversity before today, because that's not a thing that we talk about all that much, or, you know, like that's why we do panels like this, is so that I can look at that and be like, oh shit, I'm not as good as I should be. And I want to, maybe instead of putting it negative, I could be like, you know what, I really want to do better. I'm challenged now.
And within my own world, I do, like in my show Rolling with My Homies, I only right now exclusively interview other wheelchair users for the time being. And I learn something new every show. And I've been in a wheelchair for years. And I learned something new.
I'm sorry, what? Did you say? How many?
Glitch. I can't.
Bananas.
I learned something new every time, you know, whether it's a tip or a trick or something that I didn't know about in another state or whatever. So I think it's important to know that too, that even if you have a disability, you can still be learning about not only other disabilities, but your own. It's, you know, we're not immune to that.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk too much. I have one more thing though that just popped up into my head, is like, I want theaters to actually want to make a difference and not just do what looks good on paper. Because I went to a theater that would say, what's your accessibility needs? And I would say, well, I use a crutch. And so I would prefer not to be in classrooms where I have to go upstairs. And then for the entire 6 levels at that theater, I was in classrooms that were not accessible by elevator. And I would write to them after every class and say, this happened again. And then it would happen again and again and again. And so it's just because it's about appearance. Like, we want to appear that we're being accessibility mindful, but we're not, we don't actually really care. So I think just caring, we care more.
Yeah. Because what our buildings are just really people, and people are, you know, they're just like they can be consumed with their own, like if I'm a theater owner, I can be consumed with so many different things, right? And maybe I do care, but I don't, maybe I haven't heard you in a way that I need to, like Jessica's learned today. Or maybe I have a, you know, I don't know. But yeah, it is just people. It's all it is. We're not beholden to like robots or some sort of like foreign thing. It's just people running these whole things. So it is malleable. And also we're not on some time schedule. So please talk more if you want to, if you have, you know, but we can always come back to it. But I want to say we have lovely questions in the audience that they've been writing, but our co-producer here, Shoshana, if you don't mind, Shoshana, coming on camera and sharing the questions. Shoshana, everybody, welcome Shoshana. Yeah.
Shoshana. Oh, I have something in my hair still.
Okay, queen.
I also have a crying child down the hall, so I don't know if you can hear that. Anyway, yeah, you guys, if you're able to access the chat later, I would say, panelists, please do, because there's just a really lively and warm conversation coming from our friends out there, and just really appreciate people sharing their perspectives, people answering questions from their own experiences.
Good.
Yes, folks just saying, wow, you're really sharing my stories too. So one of the questions I wanted to ask, you guys have kind of answered this, but those of you who didn't really get a chance to share, somebody said they would just love to hear stories of times that you felt really comfortable and supported in your own empowerment on or off the stage.
Wonderful.
For me,
Show. Oh, go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say, for me, There's a troupe in town called Twins who did a workshop, and what they do is they it's a black woman and a white man, and
Shannon Stott.
yeah, Shannon, yeah. So Shannon's great,
Quinn
and so
Buckner.
they hosted a workshop, kind of giving us their techniques of how they use truthful material and how they talk about those conversations of like how to understand blackness from, you know, the white man's perspective of like trying to understand it. And it was in that class that there was a space opened up to have a scene about, I had a scene in an MRI where we had done a lot of like safe work of like, you know, what's a vulnerable moment for you? What do you really wish there were improv scenes about? And it got to the point where I was able to like lie down on a bench and have this like really powerful internal monologue about what it's like to be inside of an MRI and like freaking out that your body's going to, you know, like show more symptoms or progressions of it. And that was so powerful for me to see that there was something that I could uniquely bring and have that space made for it. So I think creating a space where people can really dig at their vulnerabilities and what they would like to see in the comedy, and like setting up that scene for them, saying like, okay, I hear you talking about all this time you spent in MRIs that you have to get all the time. Let's do an MRI scene and show me what that's like. So making intentional space for the experiences that people find valuable.
Beautiful.
I had like two situations that kind of are interesting to put together. I did the 47 and 48 hour improv marathon at the Hideout Theater a few years back. 47 with Jessica right there to name drop. And then 48 actually to name drop again with both Shannon Stott and Minneapolis' own Eric Heiberg. But it was funny because the first time through, I was obviously drinking still. And I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back now, I think I was probably going through a lot of withdrawal during that weekend. And I didn't realize it because we weren't really drinking at all. I think I had like 2 glasses of wine the entire weekend, which for me at the time was unheard of. And so I didn't feel a whole lot of pain. I didn't sleep a lot, whatever. But then fast forward to 2 years later, and I'm doing the 48-hour marathon, and I needed help bad. I was sober now, but my body wasn't quite caught up yet with everything that my liver was trying to, you know, fix. Well, not my liver was trying to fix, my medicine was trying to fix so that it could support my liver. But the support that I got from the people that worked that festival, I will never, ever forget. I mean, I get a little choked up thinking about it because, I mean, it was a situation where they were warming up, like they were wetting and warming up towels in the microwave right before I came off stage, and I would drop trout and they would put them on my legs because my legs were they were just shooting pains. I had to walk backstage for most of the time because if I sat, my legs would seize up on me and I would just be in excruciating pain. Imagine like having the worst Charlie horses that you've ever had in your life, but all over. So that was something that was moving to me, and it was great. I mean, people worked on me massage wise and stuff. I felt like a boxer, like trying to come out there for the next round. I would not have gotten through it. I would not have gotten through it without them and the cast in that second time at all. So there.
Thank you.
You know,
Huge Theater was. Oh, sorry. Go
ahead. Go ahead, Ryan.
Huge Theater was doing an Armando some years ago, and the special guests they had out, you know, you tell stories, and then the actors do scenes about the stories you tell. Well, the guest speaker who was doing the Armando was telling stories about blind people in his life, and they were very much punch down stories. And so it was really, you know, like how are the actors going to handle this, you know, doing scenes about this? And they ended up doing scenes where they played on all of the other things in his story that had nothing to do with blindness. And when blindness did come in, the characters were all very much empowered. And it was just this amazing way to redirect what could have been a very terrible situation into something that was not only you know, respectful, but empowering in a way that I think we don't often see for people with disabilities.
Yeah, you know, at UCB, I was the monologist several times for different shows that, called for a monologist, and I would tell stories that had to do with my wheelchair, and no one would ever incorporate them into the scenes. And I would be like, well, that was half of why that story was funny, but people are afraid. And so it took me a few years to figure out this formula that I think is really something that, I'm happy to share, because it was exciting for me when I started doing my Rolling with My Homies show on the stage. Besides putting the actors, the improvisers in wheelchairs to sort of have them experience a show in the life of, someone in a wheelchair, I would do, for the first half of the show, we would do improv based off of some sort of moment in pop culture. So I would show scenes from the episode of Saved by the Bell where Zach dates the girl in the wheelchair, or, scenes from the episode of Beverly Hills 90210 when cousin Bobby is in a wheelchair. And then all of a sudden the improvisers were capable of kind of making fun of or playing on that moment, because they were not pulling from the improviser's life, but pulling from, making fun of NBC or making fun of Zach or whatever. And then in the second half of the show, I brought up somebody who actually did live their life as a wheelchair user and interview that person. And then we would do scenes based on that person's life. But by then the improvisers were comfortable with it, because they had, gotten the laughs from the audience, and the audience was comfortable with it, and everybody was just sort of more comfortable, because they kind of felt like they had already brought down those walls and done that. So that took me a really long time to figure out that was a barrier for the non-disabled improvisers. And of course I want them to feel comfortable too. I don't want to shame anybody and force them to be comfortable with something they weren't. So that was something that I, it just happened to be a good formula that I found. And, I don't know how that helps anybody else out there, but, making fun of, like I said, the outer sources, the NBC of it all or whatever, not to keep throwing NBC under the bus, but that's, I think, what Saved by the Bell was on.
Colton, I think that's your employers.
Sorry.
They're shooting a new season coming out. It's going to be coming out soon.
Yeah. This was all a plug for Superstore. This whole thing. Yeah. So, just that was something that I found helpful. I don't know if that helps, but.
Thanks for the warning, Colton.
Yeah, for the new Saved by the Bell, guys. It's going to be really great.
That's also coming out, actually. There is going to be a new season.
Exactly. And a new Punky Brewster, if anybody wants to know this. I've seen them on the lot.
But also, just to say, I want to say, when I was on a Herald team, the people that would come up to me after the show and just say, oh my God, I didn't know, I have a physical disability, and I didn't realize that I could advance this far. I take 101 classes just for fun, but I didn't realize I could advance that far in the theater. And that always was really rewarding for me. And it made up for sort of the times where I felt like, oh, why do I have to pire all the time? Why do I have to be the one that tells this theater they need more ramps? And I have to say that when I did tell them that, they were very responsive. And I have to say that on behalf of UCB, because I know they have their issues. But as far as accessibility goes, they were always very responsive and have been working on that with me all along. But for me, it was the people in the audience who were like, hey, I didn't know I could do this, just by the visibility of me just doing what I want, to be able to advocate while doing what you want is a great gift that I think that performers with especially visible disabilities have. So there's that too.
Real quick, I took a look at the chat, and somebody who was at that marathon and helped me both times, Joy Parks is watching.
Hey, Joy!
Thank you, and I love you, Joy.
Oh, Joy is currently at our theater. That's so fun. Yeah. Hey, Joy.
Who else?
I was going to say, anytime that my team would let me host the show, which I don't always love doing, but them letting me host and be the first person out there on stage, and then having their energy and support push toward me, it shows the audience that they're not afraid to play with me, and that the audience doesn't have to be afraid of what, I always say that there's this moment of tension when I step out on stage and I have my forearm crutch, and I can feel the audience go like, oh shit, can we laugh at her? I don't know if we can laugh at her. And then when I make them laugh for the first time, the whole room relaxes, and I can feel it, and we can all feel it. And to me, that's how my team supports me, is by letting me be the first person to go out and then having my back throughout the entire show. And it normalizes it. It normalizes me for the audience and the audience to me. So
yeah, I always do a Q&A at the end of Rolling with My Homies. And at first I ask, does anybody have any questions? Crickets. And then I'll ask somebody on the stage something. And once the first person answers a question, like so many hands go up in the audience, because people want to feel free to do that, but they don't. And you're right, it's so much about making people feel comfortable, which kind of sucks. But it, I think as performers, as people, those of us who are willing to put ourselves out there, maybe we can shoulder some of that responsibility for people with disabilities who are maybe shyer and don't want to be the ones to speak up and teach other people.
Yeah, in adult life, it seems like everyone's looking for the gatekeeper, but we're all the gatekeeper. So it's that's the idea, is that the more we can walk out and have the agency to be the MC of the show, the more the people in the audience are like, well, who's this? And that's exciting. It changes the optics of the show and what we allow in comedy. It's good. That's really great.
And to do it in such a way that I think sort of emphasizes your humanity, I'm not going to walk out on stage and like wink at everybody and go, it's so great to see all of you. This is the best looking audience I've, like, that's stupid. So, but if I can come out and make a comment on the fact that I saw on Twitter today, we're all going to get a team of 9 of the world's best doctors, so we don't have to be afraid anymore. Like that's a joke worth making. That has nothing to do with my blindness.
Right.
That point that you bring up, Ryan, about humanity is so important. I think seeing people in their wholeness, and it's so helpful in like thinking about the different marginalities that people occupy. Like, I'm queer and poly and I have a disability, and I'm like I'm trying to do like a queer poly disability scene most of the time, like all of them together. And like if one of them gets shot down, like if I try to make a romantic relationship with a woman, then like I shut down all of them, right? I think like, okay, well, this is, like this is the game we're playing. So I'll just be the cookie cutter piece of bread that you want. And so I think this idea of like seeing people in their whole complexity and being really in tune with that is so important, Ryan.
Who else?
I used to never want to mention I used to shy away from any disability related anything. I didn't want it to be a part of my thing at all, because I didn't want to be put in a box or whatever. And then I realized there is this sort of disability shaped hole in comedy and entertainment. And so now I'm happy to help fill that hole. But I also want to do scenes where I'm just like from Jersey and I'm Italian and, like I'm in a fight with my boyfriend or whatever. Like, I also want to incorporate those scenes always in my comedy. So I think it's important, like, just to be seen as a whole and to be seen as different individuals, because that's the other thing when I have other people in a wheelchair on stage with me who actually use a disability, use a wheelchair. I think the audience is sometimes surprised to see that we don't approach stairs the same way. I have friends, when they see 2 steps, they pop up and down them like it's friggin' nothing. And I'm like, where's the ramp? I have no idea how to do that. So I think audiences are surprised to see that there's even diversity within the diversity,
Yeah, I didn't know you wanted to play Snooki every once in a while. But,
I have and I do.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Anyone else?
I gotta say, it's interesting. As I said, I don't talk about my disabilities much because they're very easy to hide in a physical space. They're much harder to hide when like we're on email or that kind of stuff. But I just listening to y'all, it makes me feel like, maybe I should be more open about it. Maybe I should I'm not really sure how to bring it on stage, but maybe I should bring myself on stage a little bit more. I spend so much of my time trying to like not look like somebody who has neurodiversity. Maybe I should just be neurodiverse on stage and see what that brings me. So I don't know. I'd say this is the time where I felt most supported, John.
That's beautiful.
I want to be in that show, Jessica. I want to be there for you, yo.
Yeah.
I'll try not to call out this time.
We go to the next question.
Yeah, you guys have answered this. Some folks already answered this, but someone asked if people have, if any of you have engaged in classes or workshops kind of focusing on playing for, I think, for able-bodied people, but also for people with disabilities, playing with stage partners with disabilities. I think Santina kind of got that already, but if other people have experiences with that, and I also just want to know, like, what do you think about that concept? Is that
I don't know that it has to be
too much work.
You have to do it. I think you're just talking about a class. You know, I think it's just every class should be that way. It should just be something that we don't necessarily have to be like set aside and like, this is how you do this, folks. It's like, no, we're people. Just be yourself.
When I was getting my degree in college, I remember reading an article called How to Teach Blind Children. And it was this violin teacher, and she said, you know, blind people respond really well to food. And so when I want my students to play a really dark tone on the violin, I tell them to play as though they're thinking about dark chocolate. And I thought, you know who responds well to food? Freaking everybody. There's no, you know, I guess what I would say is one of the themes that's been coming out of tonight has been like, just ask. And so I hate to say that there is one way to do a thing. And what I worry about is if I were to teach a class on how to interact with people with disabilities, I would charge you $200 and I would say, just ask them what they need, and then class dismissed. Because I think that's really all the further you ought to go with it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that goes back to your point, John, that you made earlier about befriending and talking to the people in your community that you see or that you know have physical or mental disabilities, and talking to them and just getting to know them and breaking down those barriers. I don't know how many circles of people I walked into that all of a sudden like the sea separated and I was just standing there by myself again in Chicago. And I was like, oh, I guess nobody wants to talk to the crutch girl, or just being known as like, oh, that's the girl that uses the crutch. Even just that. But I think it's humanity, our wholeness, getting to know each other, talking to one another, connecting. I mean, that's what we love to do, I think, or that's why I love to do improv. It's all about making connections. So,
and I think the more I don't know, maybe I feel like I have the bohemian spirit of what we're talking about just enlaced through me, but the more we show ourselves on stage, we can't be what we can't see is always in my heart. And it's like, if people are seeing us on stage, I know Liz and I have actually had this discussion. I think Liz, when she came to Chicago, I was on stage with a walker, and it was like, we had this long, beautiful conversation about how that was not a thing in Chicago. Like, no one was using a walker on stage. And when that's seen once, it lets other people think, can I do this? Can I be on this stage? And then those people, there's 10 of them now, and then they are seen. And it's like, we have to keep showing our beautiful, full selves and in whatever packaging and whatever way it's displayed, because it invites more and more humans into the art. It keeps inviting more people in over and over again.
Yes.
Two of you in this room are why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Thanks.
Hey, John. Nice work, John.
I saw you doing it, and I thought, if they're doing it, I can do it, and if I can do it, someone else can do it. And so there's two of you that you know, you changed the course of my comedy life. So.
Oh, it was Tara, and who else?
And Santina.
Damn it. Okay.
Next time, bud. Next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm so supportive of this.
I'm
so supportive of this idea of making it like standard practice for all improv classes and all improv spaces. I think we have a really good example, at least in my theater, of like what happens when you don't do that. When you get like, we have a siloed, sort of siloed information about, we have a program that's really great that's for kids with disabilities, where the teachers know so much and it's super well built out. And that information can when I started was more siloed in like the kids improv program. And so the people in the adult improv program, the teachers weren't nearly as like adept or aware of that. And so I love this idea of like not making it a niche thing, right? Like it shouldn't be you go out and specialize in being a teacher of improv with disability for people with disabilities, right? It should be standard practice. It's because we're not niche. And the reality is like a lot of people will end up in their lifetimes having disabilities. A lot of people age into it.
Right.
And so it's not something where you can ever really escape the idea of having a disability. And so I think it's something that all teachers need to be.
That's so right. That's so right. And so many people have disability or a different ability that we can't see. Like I have not only a spinal thing because of an injury, but I have heart failure that's genetic. I've had bad treatments that have led to other things. I have an implant, like a defibrillator, pacemaker implant. Like you don't see that necessarily when you see it. You see my cane if I have to use it today due to inflammation, but you might know a lot of people. It's like how no one thought they knew anyone gay in the 90s. And you're like, you definitely do. It's like that's just everyone's around, but not everyone feels like they can share themselves completely earnestly with other humans right now.
I think that's part of the reason we don't see a lot of people are. I think the reason we don't see a lot of people disability in TV is people are afraid that people know it can happen to them, but they're afraid of that. They don't even want to think about it, right? They don't want to confront it. And I think that so it's a snake eating its tail because they're afraid of it because they think it's going to make them miserable. But none of us in here sound miserable. We're all having a fine life, and I wish people would stop trying to growing up. I thought that I was not as sad as I was supposed to be.
Right.
I thought that I was the exception to this rule. I thought, God, thank God that I escaped the sadness of disability because it's all I kept seeing. So if we could help to normalize it, then people wouldn't be so afraid of acquiring a disability in their lifetime at some point, and then they wouldn't. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Definitely. And, going along lines of people who don't necessarily present as disabled, the thing about it is we know we are, and we think you see it. Every minute of our life, we think you can tell. And it scares the shit out of us that you're going to find us out, or that we're showing something that shows that we're weaker or whatever in your eyes. So there's a sensitivity level that I think actors in general kind of have a lot now, but it could get better for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. To be able to walk in any space where it's about art and whatever you are bringing to the table is right. It's okay. It's good. It is exactly what's needed. And that's the culture. Yeah.
Santina touched upon something that I think is so beautiful that we don't talk about enough, which is why are we not talking to each other? And I think that's the fundamental underlying scary thing about comedy theaters or shows or sets or commercial work, whatever. It's like it's all human fear is pronounced. It is absolutely, it's completely defeating. It makes you feel like you can't engage with another human because you don't want to do the wrong thing. And you're afraid you're going to have the wrong thing. And everyone's just so scared of everything. And the more these conversations are, again, like normalized and shared, and we're able to say, hey, do you ever think about dying? That's scary. And people are like, hey, this is a fine conversation to have. Or, mental health is really scary. And like, we have to take care of ourselves and go to therapy. Like the more we start saying things like that, the more it becomes an average conversation with friends that care about you rather than like toxicity that we never embrace, right? Fear is the thing. It's the thing that stops everyone from being a happier community everywhere.
Yeah. It's so funny how we're so okay to accept somebody who is riding their bike and they scrape their knee and you go, oh, it looks like you scraped your knee. You're like, yeah, I was riding my bike. I had a newspaper shift. Oh, you were doing your job. And then if someone's like, oh, this is just how my knee, I was born this way. You go, oh, so sorry. It's like so noble for someone who had a job and they, scrape their knee that way. But if they're born, it's like, oh, okay. I want to ask, does anyone have questions for each other in here?
I feel like I know all you guys really well now. This is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, y'all want to get coffee when the pandemic's over?
Yeah. Let's hang.
I do have a question, and I'm putting together an audition form, and I would like to be able to say something on it like, man, if you can't, like we are welcoming of people who may not be able to make every show. This is going to be in Zoom. So how would you put that? Like, how would you make it so that people know that they're welcome? If maybe they'll have to talk with me to figure out the best way to work with them to make sure that their voice is heard, but that we welcome that.
I don't know, Jessica. For me, I think it might be saying something like there is no hey, there's no repercussion for you needing to take time or space for yourself. So please, we welcome those things at the top of this conversation. It's like weird, right? To say, I mean, it's unique, I suppose, to say like, hey, do you know what? We prize your mental health and your well-being. So don't feel afraid to disclose whatever you need to make this a warm space for you or warm cast for you. Maybe that's a thing.
Yes.
Yeah, a more passive way to do it too is maybe just to say that, you know, we're going to have a large cast. So if you don't have to be available for every single show, and we understand that emergencies come up.
Great.
Like that. So you don't even have to bring it up.
Yeah. And I would also add another option, which is along the same theme of let's get rid of being worried about saying the right or wrong thing, and let's just say the thing, right? If on your heart is, I believe people may be going through some things or they may have some disabilities. So if you want to acknowledge it or you don't want to acknowledge it, or here's some things, you know, just spell it out. I feel like if anyone was to complain and be like, hey, how dare you spell out every single thing that I've been, you know, I think then that's a separate problem.
Disability is not a dirty word.
Right.
No.
Right.
Yeah, and I would also say to people who, I don't know how to say this, don't fake, like if you don't have a disability, I guess like, for example, you know, these people who are saying they can't wear masks because it's a disability. If it's not, don't use it as an excuse. Just, I don't know how to say this, but I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Don't fake it. If your service, if your pet is your pet, don't say it's your service animal or whatever the thing is, because no, I'm speaking. Who's going to listen to me? No one's going to listen to me. People are just going to keep doing what they're doing. But just know that I'm just know I'm
Somebody listen.
If you save one starfish, it's worth it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this has been really great. You know, I really appreciate everybody coming together, and you know, it's been so great too to get people from all over, you know, the country, you know, and people who are living with all different types of disabilities. You know, really kind of going to what Ryan said about, you know, just ask the questions, and sort of what the, you know, the next logical action after asking is to then listen. And so asking and listening, I think, are going to be such huge advantages for people who, you know, have disabilities, but also with people who don't have disabilities in interacting in our community, and being open to give that patience and that space, you know, that we were talking about before, where people were able to find, you know, that scene, you know, inside an MRI, or that space to walk out on the stage and to host the show, you know, giving each other that space and that place to allow themselves to shine. You know, I think it's really important. One thing I did think, though, that might be an interesting class, just hearing from, you know, and it just goes to those of you at theater, hearing kind of what Ryan and Liz were talking about, but possibly a class for people who feel like they that they don't emote visually on stage or in scenes, or that's something that might be a hindrance for them. Because you know, I know, you know, at least for me, I would, you know, I'm constantly emoting, so there's no, you know, my wife knows exactly how I'm feeling at any time. You know, but that's, you know, and in some ways that's, you know, what helps my performance. And I think it's sort of taken for granted that's, I think even Ryan, you kind of said it, of like, well, that's the acting bug. That means you were the actor. not necessarily true. There's a
Mhm.
lot of people out there who are great storytellers and want to tell great stories, and they maybe just need a couple more tools in the tool belt. So I
Yeah.
wonder if that might be an interesting class to make available for people who are, have any kind of,
Yeah.
neurodivergence or anything like that, where they feel like,
Right.
a class that's specifically for them to go, okay, well, this is sort of a roadblock that I see. How
Mhm.
can we? What are some exercises, some things that we could do, and what's a safe space where I can work that out?
Yeah, or even like even myself, I knew that was a roadblock for a hurdle to learn how to emote because I came from an area where you don't. You're supposed to
Yeah.
keep it in tight, keep it tight. Don't be too loud about it. Like even though things I may say may be interesting or whatever, but I wasn't showing it until somebody told me, like, you really got to show it. And I was like, oh, that's why you've been mad at me because I haven't been showing. I got you, teacher. Okay, Lauren Anderson. So.
Right. I also think I'd love to, there's two other panels I'd like to see listening to this. One of them is just sort of the intersection of sexuality and disability.
Yeah.
I think would be an amazing panel to hear. And I'm not going to be hosting that one, I promise. Because I just want to listen to that one. And then also, Chuy, for me, I've always wondered about this too with addiction. It is such a big issue in our comedy community. And there's a lot of ways, and I think now we're in a different time. Addiction is kind of dealt a little bit different than even it was 10 years ago. But sometimes our community is not helpful for getting people over and out of addiction. And so I think those would also be some great panels to see happen and some great discussion to see what we could do. So those are my two pitches for huge panels later. And
you got it.
If you want to talk about drinking, I'll do it for hours.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
Same for sex.
Great.
Oh, I can do that too.
Great. We'll do it. We'll do it more honestly. And I love that workshop. Shoshana, just as co-producer, any final things you want to add to it? I want to do the wrap it up.
Yeah, one more thing I want to say. It was kind of a rhetorical question. Somebody who's been sharing a lot of insights in the chat with their own life experiences with disability and comedy just said, I can't think, it's so good, it's hard to come up with a question. How can we make all teachers and directors watch this?
Yeah, exactly. How do we not preach to the choir?
Yeah. Right. So to that point, right, I want to thank you specifically, Colton, because I think right now we're modeling that we are all the market, we are all the community. It doesn't matter whether you're a student or you're filming a show or you're, traveling abroad to do a tour. We all have a say in this. We all have a hand in this. It's, there really isn't, I guess, some sort of a ruler or a queen or a king. There's no monarchy that we have in comedy that says how you're supposed to behave and when you're supposed to care and when you're not. So I think I just really, I just wanted to show my appreciation, highlight that like you are modeling how it's supposed to be done. And then as you move along your journey, you're supposed to bring people up with you in any way that you can and continue to talk about things and educate folks. And the same with you, Tara. And I mean, I'm sure the same could be said for every single one of us here. And I think there's just something to be said about it and how we're just valuing it in my eyes now. Anybody else?
And take that YouTube link and, whatever, whoever's out there watching, whatever theater you work at, send it to the artistic director of that theater, send it to some of the teachers, send it to the other performers and say, our theater could probably do better. Here's some experiences from people. And you know what? Look, I'm, a mixed race Black dude. Everybody's story here at one point touched me personally just because I was able to put myself in it. Once you hear somebody's story, it's impossible not to connect with people. So, the problem is people don't take the time to listen to the stories. So spread these stories out, share them with your friends. And definitely, if you can't, send them to any artistic directors or teaching staff in the theater or community that you're in.
Yeah. And guess what? They are hard conversations. But guess what conversations that are hard do? They make people act. Anytime, that's the only kind of way I got results. So sometimes it had to be a hard conversation. I guess that concludes today. Thank you so much, everyone. Yeah, we did it. I want to thank Liz Marcucci.
Yeah.
All right. I want to thank Santina Muha.
Good.
Thank you. I want to thank Alayna McNamara.
You know, you got the first half right.
All right. Yes.
Look at him
Thank
sweat.
Elena McNamara.
McNamara. Thank you. Chuy, Zarate.
Close enough.
Zarate.
Damn it.
That's
I
good.
want to thank you so much. I want to thank Tara DeFrancisco.
You did it. You did it, buddy. You did it.
I want to thank Ryan Strunk. Yeah. Woo.
Softball, baby. Mm.
Jessica Arjet.
You got it.
Yes. All right. And then Colton Dunn. Yeah. Shoshana Alexander Daniels. And our tech person and artistic director and hero, Rita Borsma.
Rita, thank you, Rita.
Yeah. Once again, I think Colton, if you want to talk a little bit more about Huge, I don't know if you want to donate, maybe they can.
You want me to do it? Okay, guys, donate to Huge. It's a great theater out of Minneapolis. They're doing a lot of great things, and theaters right now, you guys know the score. There's a lot more people in line that are going to be getting help before your live theater venues in the city that you're in. Huge is a great theater in Minneapolis, so if you even got $5, throw it Huge's way to help them get through this tough time. And not only will they have more cool panels like this on Zoom, but soon they'll have cool shows in their theater that you can go to. So donate to Huge.
Yes, thank you so much. Yes. On behalf of everybody at Huge, thank you all so much for listening in. Everything here feels like a continued conversation and ongoing. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you and good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
And we'll turn the cameras off. We can stay here though. Or you can keep them on, whatever. It's your life.